This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario. Hi everyone, it is Rebecca and Tara, and today we have what I think will be an interesting and maybe fun topic to discuss, which is place as character. So Tara, since we started off first, and I botched the beginning, we had to start it all over again.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm good, except for that, bobble at the beginning. But anyway,
Yeah.
so what have you been up to?
What have I been? Well, I recently got back from a family camping trip. We went up to the Georgian Bay, so we went to the park as Awenda Park and went camping for 4 days. And during that camping trip, I did manage to sneak in a trip to a little local bookstore. So I went to Georgian Bay Books, which is in Midland, Ontario. It is a fairly new bookstore. I think maybe it's been open a year or so. I'm not quite sure, but whenever we go somewhere, I like to Google if there's any bookstores within the vicinity. And this popped up, and I know it wasn't there last time we went camping at Awenda.
Oh,
So, anyways, sorry. All that goes to say that I went and visited Georgian Bay Books in Midland, Ontario, and it is a delightful little store. It's tiny. But all four of us were so impressed with what they packed in on those shelves. Their shelves were jam-packed, but still in like a really shoppable way, if that makes sense. As sometimes places are so jam-packed, it's overwhelming and you can't see what's on the shelves.
mm-hmm.
They still had so much, but you could see everything, and it was just fun to shop at the store. I really enjoyed it.
It's kind of interesting. I feel like there's this renaissance of small independent bookstores.
Mhm.
Amazon forever has just killed many bookstores
Yeah.
over time. But it seems weird, like maybe there's just this resurgence now, which is fabulous.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, we weren't the only ones there. When we arrived, there was a couple already shopping, and then they left while we were there. And then another like young person came in at one point to pick up a book that he had ordered from them. So they had like a really, I feel like they're setting up a beautiful book shopping environment there in Midland. It was really
Oh,
nice to see.
nice.
Yeah.
So what I assume you bought something.
I did. I bought only two books actually, and stickers. They had really nice sticker collection as well. I love
Love
buying
that.
stickers at bookstores now. So I bought the newest Leslie Crew book, which is Death and Other Inconveniences. And then I bought a bird book called Field Notes from an Unintentional Birder by, I believe it's Julia Zarankin. And this is a
Okay.
book that came out, I think, in 2021. And I've been wanting this book since I first heard of it. And this is the first time I'd seen it in a store. I'm showing Rebecca the cover because we're doing
Yeah, I love the cover.
yeah, it's a beautiful little cover with some illustrations, bird illustrations. And anyways, super excited by that one. What have you been up to?
Well, I have gift cards, and I don't know if I've actually said this before. Maybe I have, but on my credit card, if you buy stuff, you get these perks, these points you add up. Well, during COVID, I especially just gathered up so many points. And finally, I thought it was mostly for air miles. And then I was like, well, I'm not going anywhere. So then I looked online, and one of the stores that I can shop at is Barnes and Noble. So it is free money because I always pay my credit card off every month. So I just earn points. So I went to Barnes and Noble and I picked up a bunch of books I already read, but that I wanted to own. But I bought the latest book, or the first book, from Gretchen. Well, I don't know if it's first, from Gretchen Whitmer. Anyway, sorry, Governor of Michigan, True Gretch, What I've Learned About Life, Leadership, and Everything in Between. And one of our good friends, Zeralda, is currently listening to it in audiobook, and Big Gretch does narrate it. But
Very
I have to laugh. I am a Michigander, but she does have a very strong Michigan accent, which I don't think I could listen to a whole book. And I'm a Michigander, but I love her. I love Big Gretch, but I'm not sure I could listen to a whole book. So I can't wait to ask
Yeah.
Zeralda how it went. So
I
anyway,
love that title, True Gretch. That's a great title.
it is, and actually she changed her her social media to because I don't remember I think it just said GE Gretch or something before, and now it does say True Gretch on it. And she has been all over the United States promoting this book. And in fact, I saw a video this morning. She was talking to Jake Tapper and asked him if he was having a brat summer, which was I thought was very funny. So let's see. What else? I feel like there was something else.
Oh, how about
Oh,
our currently reading?
yes, currently reading. So I am currently reading Widow Fantasies by our good friend Hollay Ghadery.
Mhm.
And it is what is it? Microfiction? I forget what it's
Yeah,
called.
or flash fiction.
Thank you. Flash fiction. I couldn't remember. And I am enjoying it. And it's so funny because I was never a really big short story reader, but over the years, I have been developing more of a love for short stories. And now this flash fiction is really fascinating because it does leave you wanting more, but then it doesn't because the stories are so tight
Yeah,
and fun and interesting. Anyway, so that's what I'm currently reading.
yeah.
And
Nice.
it comes out, I think, in September.
I think so too. Well, I have two that I'm currently reading. So my current nonfiction is Love That Story by Jonathan Van Ness. So he is a actor, comedian, one of the hosts of Queer Eye. So I think this is his second book, and it's a collection of essays just on queer life, essentially. I'm only maybe a quarter of the way through, but I'm really enjoying it. I love his voice in this book, his style of writing. He's very open, he's humorous, he's funny, and it's quite enjoyable. I'm really liking it.
I watched the original Queer Eye guys who I really
Mhm.
liked, but this is like part two,
Yeah,
kind of like
yeah,
new people, right?
the new generation. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't watched any of that. So,
Yeah. Honestly, Rebecca, I started reading the book before I had started watching it too. I don't
oh,
know what this book somehow came on my radar, and I picked it up. And then when I started reading it, I'm like, I feel like I should actually watch the show a little bit. So I started only a couple of days ago, started watching the show, and I'm hooked. It's delightful. I
yeah.
flipping love it. Yeah, and he's delightful. Yeah, so that's my current nonfiction. And my current fiction, which you will be very excited about, is Road Ends by Mary Lawson, which Rebecca
Ooh.
has already read and lent to me with uh, the command that not the command, because I'm fine with this command, that we discuss it. She really wants to, I think you really enjoyed it until the end, if I'm remembering correctly. I can't remember.
No, it's more that I just absolutely love Mary Lawson. So
Oh yeah.
even just being in Mary Lawson's world, in her language, in her skill, I love that. But I have to admit, even pretty early on, I was just not, which I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to influence you at all, but I can't wait to see if you have the same reading experience as I did, because we both really love Mary Lawson.
Oh yeah. I
Mhm,
love I'm only maybe 60 pages in because I haven't with work haven't been able to like really deep dive into it yet.
mhm,
Um and I love being in like her writing sucks me in
mhm.
instantly. Instantly. So I do. I love being in her world. I'm finding this book a little stressful at times. It's very character driven, right? Like
Yes, mhm.
very character driven on a particular family, and you're getting each chapter focuses on a different member of this family. And one character story I'm finding very stressful,
Yep.
and a couple of characters I'm finding kind of unlikable.
Mhm.
Like they're not great. They're not a great family.
Right.
So I'm really interested to see where it goes. And there's one character who I'm finding very interesting, but we have not gotten their story yet. And
Mhm.
I don't know if I'm going to get their story because I haven't looked ahead. So it's already a reading experience, and I'm only on like page 60 or 70.
And in you with you all saying all of those things, I do think it could be a really great book club book
Hmm.
if people were willing to read something that they may at the end say, I didn't like that, or I didn't like those characters or something. Because again, you can't fault the writing. It's flawless as
It is.
always. But it would be a great discussion book for that reason because I had such strong feelings about it. And yeah,
Yeah,
I can't
me
wait till
too.
you finish
I
it.
know. I can't wait till I finish too because I love reading her books. And you know what? I realize as we're discussing it that it makes a great segue into our topic because Mary Lawson's books are very place focused in a fictional town of Strawn. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I think that's pretty close. Strawn, Ontario, so very small town, Ontario. Rhodes End is set in the 60s, but so I can't remember the timing of the other books, but it's got a very strong sense of place, and we are discussing place as character today.
Perfect segue. Oh my
Segue.
gosh.
Oh my god, I'm getting so good at this.
You are, but I'm not. But yes, I love that. That was a great segue. Yeah. Well, if it's okay, I'm gonna actually start
Yeah.
because I had more. I think when we sort of talked about it, I said, yeah, let's each do five, and then all I did was because I don't have, I can't remember back if I didn't write it down or somewhere, I don't have a memory of it, but unless it comes up randomly, but. I just went through my Goodreads list and then just listed all the books that I felt really where I felt place was a character, where it was very
Mhm.
specific in my mind. So I ended up with 13. I think you had 5, which, that's what I told you, but I
Yeah.
cheated. So,
No, no.
uh,
Let's do you do two, and then I'll
okay.
do one kind of thing.
Okay,
Switch up.
cool.
Want to do it like
Okay.
that?
That's perfect because the first ones I want to talk about, they're set in the same place.
There we go.
So it's Scarborough.
We're both
Yeah,
getting so good at this.
it's Scarborough by Catherine Hernandez and Brother by David Chariandy. And both of them are set in Scarborough. And I have to tell you that I've spent a lot of time in Toronto. I've been there many, many times. And I'm aware of Scarborough. I know where it's at. I know how to get there and everything. I mean, public transportation wise. And both of these books really gave me a sense of what Scarborough is and what it looks like, what it feels like, what it sounds like, what it tastes like. I just had such I just sort of feel like I know it, even though I've never been there. So I think both of those books did a brilliant job, and that was the purpose of those books was to really highlight those communities or that community. And I think they just both did a brilliant job in having place be a strong character.
That's a great pairing, Rebecca. Great pairing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to start off with so I'll do a little back. I'm going to back up a minute. When I was choosing my books, I realized I don't know if I read a lot of books in which character, sorry, there I go again, in which place is a character. But when I do, they really they really stick with me. Like I
Hmm.
love that experience of having a place as character. And one of the first books in which I had this like aha moment, although I had read previous, there will be other books I'm going to list later, but that I had read earlier in life, but now I realize it's place as character. But one of the first ones that I really had this aha moment was Lost Girls by Andrew Piper. Do you know this one?
No.
Okay, so Andrew Piper, a Canadian author, and I believe this was his first book. I think he'd written short stories before this. He writes a lot of horror books. This was his first book. It's more of like a crime fiction. And at the time that I read this book, it was unintentional, but I was in essentially where he had set this book. So
Oh.
Lost Girls is set in Northern Ontario cottage country. And in present day, it's about the disappearance of two young girls from this small town. But previous to that, 20 years earlier, it's also against the backdrop of a young girl who drowned in a lake while her cousin was there in the boat. So you have like both of those stories are going on at the same time. And when I read this book, I was at a cottage that we had rented in cottage country right on the lake, and there were moments as he was describing sometimes it could be there were like some really creepy moments in this book, especially when he talked about the drowned girl and described her drowning and the circumstances. When I'm looking around and I'm like, I am right where it happened. Like I'm like I can see the spot where she drowned. I couldn't. It's a fictional book, but I was like so immersed in his story, and my surroundings matched the story, and I loved it. And in the book, it like Northern Ontario is very much a character to this story, and then it was only like ramped up by my surroundings while I was reading it. It was an awesome experience. I loved it.
Did you realize when you were taking that book, were you thinking to yourself, "Oh, it's about cottage country and I'm gonna read this book while
No,
I'm there"? Excellent.
just kind of happened. And then as I was reading it, I was like, because he just it would describe the city, or sorry, the town that upon which the lake was built. No, the town, anyways. What I don't, you know what I'm trying to say.
Mhm,
The
yeah.
town that the lake was a part of, and it was like we would go into town for groceries, and you could almost like it was just the description of it was so spot on. It was crazy.
Did it make the story creepier?
I think so.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because sometimes I would read it. I love reading outdoors. So I would sneak down because the cottage was right on the water and had like these big boulders. So I could go down with my like lawn chair and sit right beside the lake in the evenings and read it. The best. The
Wow.
light, yeah.
That is cool. I love that's a great story. Dang. Well, it's funny that you should say that place doesn't necessarily, resonate with you. And it does for me, and I think because since I was a kid, I was a weird kid. I pored over atlases. I was always curious about the world. Cultural geography was my favorite subject in school, and I became a geography major in college. So, place and place has always had meaning for me. So I think that's why it really hits me a lot when I'm reading. So the next two I'm going to talk about are books that I read recently. Actually, I'm going to do three just because I've read them recently. I've talked about them. I'm not going to go into great detail. Although actually, maybe I didn't talk about this one yet. But Picnic at Hanging Rock by Joan Lindsay, which is set in a real place called Hanging Rock in Victoria in Australia. And I saw the movie like a million years ago, but I had never read the book. And when you see that, and I think part of that for me was because I had seen the movie, and place is a character. It is a visceral, palpable character in the book. It's basically about these girls. They go to a private school. Two teachers take them out for a picnic. It's in the 19 early 1900s, I think. They go on a picnic. One of the teachers and I think three or four girls go missing, and that's the story. And I had forgotten that it was a real place. So when I was reading it, anyway, I looked it up and now I know exactly where they were, what it looked like. Anyway, it's very creepy. I mean, it's visually very beautiful, but it's creepy when you think about it. That's why I wondered if you're reading a book about an area where you are. Like, I don't know if I could go to Hanging Rock and read that book. I just think it'd be too creepy. But anyway, so Picnic at Hanging Rock. The second one is The Street by Ann Petry, which I just had read recently. And it's set in Harlem, New York in the 1940s. And again, that street is a character. It's what holds her back, the main character, from living her life, being able to go forward in her life. And again, it's a very, very strong character because if you took that specific street out of the story, there just wouldn't be a story. So I include that one. And then the next one I just want to mention, because again, I read all three of these recently. My Ántonia by Willa Cather. It's set in Nebraska. It's what Cather is known for, is this Midwestern, um, it's kind of like a genre for her. It's just this thing about describing the landscape. It is a living, breathing character in her books, in probably all of her books. So, and she's very well known for that. So, those are my next three.
Excellent. Well, you know what? One of your books, I'm going to piggyback off of that. with my next book, and because you mentioned the Australian geography, so my next author is Australian,
All
and it
right.
is Jane Harper. So I don't know if you're familiar with her. She has a whole, I think her first book was 2014, something like that. So I'm going to go with her first book, which is called The Dry, and it's the first in her Aaron Falk series, and it is set in which and so it's set in Australia, and all of her books are very Australian. Like the geography of Australia is kind of what is the backdrop, but very, like you said, viscerally, very much there kind of
Hmm.
thing. So this one she has set in a small farming community in the worst drought in a century. So you can feel the scorching heat and the dryness. It's part of the story, and it's so I highly recommend. I think I've read all of her books, and she sets them in different parts of Australia. So even if
Oh,
the town itself might be fictional, the geography isn't. Like, it'll
yeah.
be in the outback or in the bush, and it's just there. Even when she goes to Melbourne, which obviously isn't fictional, like it's obviously set in Australia. It could be set nowhere else.
Yeah.
You know, I love her
I
books.
I've not heard of her, and so I'm definitely going to check that one
Oh,
out.
she's
Because
fantastic.
yeah, because Australia is such a fascinating place geographically, and
Hmm.
so if especially if she's writing about different areas within Australia, that would be really, really
Oh yeah,
fascinating.
yeah. You would enjoy her.
Okay. My next two, oh, are set in Toronto. There you go.
Mm.
Denison Avenue. I just felt like partly because I have been in Kensington and Chinatown in the Toronto area, and I honest to God, especially when you look at the, illustrations, I thought I recognized some of the places, some of the shops and everything. So I think Denison Avenue did a great place again, or great job at that. The book could have been set somewhere else, but it would have been a completely different story,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And then Bellevue Square by Michael Redhill, which it was supposed to be, I think, a trilogy. And I keep looking, and he hasn't written the second book, and he won the Giller and everything
Yeah,
for it. And I'm like, what the hell's he doing? Like, what did you ever read it?
I did. Yeah, and I didn't realize it was supposed to be a trilogy.
Yeah, he said it was a trilogy from the beginning, and then it just hasn't done anything with it. So, and I do check from time to time. But anyway, uh, I love it because Bellevue Square, I've been there. Again, when I think of that book, I think of I just see it geographically. And I think again, because I used to go to Toronto a lot, haven't been in a while, but it just I just feel like I can see the people. I don't know. It's very, very strong in my mind's eye. And again, that's kind of why I want him to keep writing or to complete this thing because I just feel like he has so much more to say. And plus, it was such a weird,
Hmm.
quirky story. And it's not the normal thing I would read. But anyway, I really want him to do it. So hopefully someday he does. But
Yeah.
yeah. So those two are Toronto.
Okay. Well, I'm going to piggyback off you again, and
Okay.
my third choice is going to be also a Toronto book, and
Okay.
it is River Mama by Zalika Reed Benta, in which a millennial Black woman is given a task by a Jamaican water deity known as River Mama. She then embarks on a quest through the streets of Toronto, and I flipping love this book. Was it last year, 2 years ago? Within the last 2 years,
It
anyways.
was last year.
I think
Yeah.
it was last year, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Anyways, I loved this one for the same reasons that you mentioned for Denison Avenue. Like it could be set nowhere, like it could be set somewhere else, but it would be a different book
Hmm.
because you're literally walking, sometimes running through the streets of Toronto with her in the parks, in like the big finale at the end, which I don't want to spoil for anyone if they haven't read it, but which like delighted me to no end when I read. This was a romp of a book. And I flipping loved it.
Yeah, I don't know how I missed that one, but I agree with you. Yeah, it's the same thing. It falls on that category of
Yeah,
if it were set in a different place, it'd be a completely different story. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, even like you mentioned Denison Avenue, and I was like, oh, why didn't I think of that? Yes, that's a perfect one for it. Yep.
Okay, I think I'm gonna skip my next one because I feel like you're gonna mention it, so I'm gonna hold off because I want you
Oh,
to have the glory of mentioning it, but I could be wrong. Maybe you don't, but I will go with my next one.
okay.
I just have to mention The Lost Ones by Sheena Kamal, which was part of the Nora Watts series. So it was a trilogy. Well, actually, it was, and it had a little novella that went along with it. The reason I picked that one is because I didn't really know that much about like East Vancouver as an American. I just didn't really know it that well. And I'll tell you what, that I felt like after I read her first book, holy crap, that I felt like I felt like I'd walked on those city streets
Hmm.
with Nora. I felt like I had a concept of where I was. And anyway, it was just so real to me. And I appreciate that because I think often, should say US citizens, we have an idea of Vancouver. We go like, oh, Vancouver, it gets this big, you know, which it should. It's a beautiful city and, the landscape and blah, 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 blah. But then there's this whole other side, which is East Vancouver, which is different, right?
Mhm.
Which has maybe some more challenges, et cetera. And so I love knowing a little bit more about that city than just what we kind of generally our general knowledge of it. So I really had to give a shout out. Now the second book in the series is set in Detroit, still same characters, etc., set in Detroit, and the third one kind of comes back to Vancouver. But that first book in the series was just so palpable to me. I loved it.
Okay. So I think this might be the one that you have on your list then. Maybe this is the similar one. It's my Anna Green Gables. Is it? I
Yep, it was.
was trying to think. I'm like, what could it be? And I'm like, oh wait. So yeah, so my next two choices. I'll share my last one later. But so my last two choices for books are authors who set their books in places that I physically, like a piece of my heart, is in geographically belongs to this place, to the book as well as the place. So, Anne of Green Gables, I knew was a given that you knew would be on my list, but it has to be on the list. I've been
Yep.
visiting PEI since I was a young child, and I love that place. And every time I read one of Lucy Maud Montgomery's books. Well, they're not all set in PEI, but ones that are set in PEI, that I return to PEI and I love it. It brings back like the summers, the water, the red sand, just everything is encapsulated in those books for me.
Yeah, I knew it had to be on your list
Yeah.
because and I have never been there, but I that is one of my top places I want to go because I love the book so much. It's so iconic and it's Canada, it's PEI, it's Canadian literature. It's everything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It had to be there. It had to be.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to then bring up a title that is of an area I'm really familiar with, which is Chevy in the Hole by Kelsey Ronan, because the book is set in Flint, Michigan, which is where I was born and raised. And reading that, it was definitely a love letter to Flint in all of its beauty and tragedy. And that book could be set nowhere else but. And I loved it because Flint gets a bad rap. People, it was the murder capital of the US for, I don't know, a number of years or whatever. And so we get a bad rap in so many different ways. And I just sort of feel like it's it's deserved and not deserved because people had to make it what it was. And I don't mean the people who live there. I'm talking about the people who govern there, the state, whatever. Everybody who's contributed to what happened in Flint. So I just will always love that book because like I said, it was a really beautiful love letter to Flint.
Okay, well, my last choice is also going to be about my home province. So I'm like piggybacking off you each time, and I love it. So this author sets all of his books in Newfoundland. So it's Michael Crummy. If I have to choose, it's difficult to choose one book. So I will go with Galore. But I find so all of his books are set in Newfoundland, and although he talks about his books are about the human condition, those books could not happen without Newfoundland's history and geography. So those, like both of those combine to set up the circumstances of each of his books. So whether it's like Galore with the fishing in a fishing community, you're talking about the innocents with the brother and sister on an extremely isolated outport in which they are the only two citizens and only to be seen like once or twice a year, visited by other people. His first book, The River Thieves, set like a couple of hundred years ago with the interaction of the English and the Beothuk, the indigenous people of Newfoundland at the time. They all depend upon the geography, setting it up, usually for isolation, and the history. Whether it's, like I said, the indigenous people of the mercantile system, the fishery. His books are in Newfoundland. And every time I had a chance to meet him, I think it was last year when his last book was published, and I got a chance to like go up afterwards and have my book signed. And I told him, I'm like, every time I read your books, I'm like, I'm going back to Newfoundland. Like even though they are set so far in the past, I'm not going back. I've never been there that far back, but I'm going back to my home province. There's a little piece of Newfoundland in each one.
Oh, I
love
love
his
that.
books. Yeah.
That's beautiful. You know who I thought you were going to mention was, I can't remember, the author that has the three names.
David Adams Richards.
Thank you.
Yes, I was. He was there because I'm like, that's New Brunswick. So hey, I just did. His books are all set, or most of them set in the Miramichi River of New Brunswick, and I love his books. I love his books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But would you agree that it's the same thing for him as well, that New Brunswick really comes through, that area really, really comes through in his writing, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, because I am going to include him on the on our show notes, because I do think if people aren't aware, you've talked about him a number of times. I've read one book so far, but we want to just highlight his stuff as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
I don't know why I didn't include him actually.
Yeah, but that's so funny, because that's where I thought you were going with it, but I should have realized. I couldn't remember what area he wrote about, and so yeah, it makes sense. Obviously, Michael Crummy. So okay, because it's Newfoundland, I get it. Yeah. Okay, so I have three more. So I'll just mention the one that's it's kind of a light touch, but I thought it was still. It gave me a sense of something that I didn't really know, again, as an American, I didn't really get, which was Hotline, but by Dimitri Nasrallah, because it's set in Montreal, and just kind of getting that sense of Montreal was interesting for me, because I hadn't really, again, I think of it so much as like a French city. Like I have an idea in my head of what Montreal is. I've been there once, but it was in the winter. It was really, really freaking cold, which I loved. But yeah, that's my big memory of it. It was just so cold. But it gave me a little bit of a hint about what Montreal is about, not the sort of vacation spot, in a sense. You know what I mean? Like how real people live in Montreal. So I'm kind of giving a little bit of a small nod there. And then the next one I want to mention is The Rabbit Hutch by Tess Gunty, which won the National Book Award last year, I think it was. And what's really interesting about it is the place that is so visual in my mind is that apartment complex that they live in, because that is the whole point. It's called the Rabbit Hutch because all of these people are sort of living close to each other in this space. And so when you're reading it, you can just feel the tension and the chaos, really, of just people being sort of pushed together in that sense. So when I think of that book, that's what I think of. It's set in a fictional town in Indiana where industry has left. And so, again, being from Flint, I recognized the landscape. I recognized the motivations of the people there and how it became what it became. But that book is fascinating. So if you haven't read that one, I highly recommend it. And I was just reading some of the stuff on the short list last year, and that one was available. And I'm glad I read it because it won. And I don't often read the winners before they're announced. So that one was really good. And then my last one is The Break by Katharina Vermette. And I picked this one because she really made Winnipeg's North End. She meant it in that book, because as I was reading it, because I do this, I'm telling you, it's like kind of an annoying habit of mine, but I can't kind of stop doing it. So when somebody writes a book and it's set in a real place, then I start looking things up to say, is this where they are? So I was literally reading this book and following along the streets that she mentioned. And I was telling somebody, there's a scene where, like, down like this verge or something, there's all these power line, or what do they call power
like towers, but
towers? Yeah.
Yeah,
towers. I looked it up and they're there. Like, I did the Google map and did the real, the one where you can actually see this stuff. And I was like, holy shit, that is exactly where she's writing about. So to me, that book will always be those towers and those streets and everything. It was so visual for me reading that book. And so absolutely, I feel like if I ever went to Winnipeg, I would have some sense of where I am. I think it would feel somewhat familiar to me because of her book.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I know. I almost put that one on my list too. I thought that was.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
All right. Well, I think that's it. Like I said, I had a lot. So, because I do think that it means something to me. It matters to me. It's sort of like how when I read books that are set in the winter, those are often my favorite books. I don't forget them because I like to read about cold places. So I think it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah. I was going to say, I don't particularly search out books that have place as character.
Mm-hmm.
However, I do search out books that are set in like Newfoundland, PEI, Nova Scotia, or anywhere in the east coast of Canada. Those I do make a particular point of. Those are my favorite.
Yeah, that's cool.
For that same reason.
All right. Well, I think we did a pretty good job of identifying some books that maybe you all have read, and maybe some are new books. But if you're looking for new books to you, but maybe if you're looking for something where place is a very strong character, hopefully we've given you something to work with.
Yeah. And if you have any suggestions, you can send us a message, or if you're listening on YouTube, leave it in the comments. Like, if you have a book in which place is a character for you, let us know. We would love to hear them. And happy reading. Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style, and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.